On December 7th, 1941, Japanese officers stood convinced they had shattered the United States Navy. Battleships burned at Pearl Harbor. Smoke hung over the harbor like a funeral shroud. And in Tokyo, naval planners believed the American Pacific Fleet would need years to recover. Years of hesitation, years of fear, years of uncontested Japanese dominance. But there was one problem. America's aircraft carriers were not in the harbor. USS Enterprise was returning from Wake Island. USS Lexington was delivering aircraft to Midway. USS Saratoga was away on refit. The most important weapons of modern naval war had survived. At first, Japanese intelligence dismissed them as irrelevant. Isolated ships, too few to matter. A wounded enemy, lashing out before retreating behind the Pacific. Then, barely 3 months later, American carriers struck back. On April 18, 1942, U.S. Navy bombers lifted off the deck of USS Hornet. Their target was not a fleet, not an island, but Tokyo itself. When news reached Japanese naval headquarters, disbelief spread through the room. American aircraft over Japan? So soon? Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had warned that the United States would be most dangerous when wounded. Now, his warning echoed louder than ever. The Doolittle raid caused little physical damage, but the psychological shock was devastating. Japan was not untouchable. The Pacific was not secure, and the American carriers were not hiding. They were hunting. Only weeks later, USS Enterprise and Hornet struck Japanese bases in the Marshalls and Gilberts. Fast Heights. Precise attacks. Gone before retaliation could arrive. Each strike sent the same message. The U.S. Navy was already back. For Japanese officers who had expected a long, one-sided war, the realization was unsettling. If American industry could replace losses this fast, if carriers could appear without warning, then Pearl Harbor H. And in just a few months, that awakening would lead both fleets toward GY.
Japanese naval officers begin to see it firsthand. Captured American documents, aerial reconnaissance photos, interrogations of prisoners. One report stuns them. The United States is producing more than one major warship per week. That figure feels impossible, yet it's real. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States will build 24 fleet carriers, 9 light carriers, over 100 escort carriers, thousands of destroyers, transports, and support vessels. Japan, in the same period, struggles to complete a handful. Late 1943, Truk Lagoon. Once called the Gibraltar of the Pacific, Truk is Japan's forward naval stronghold. American aircraft arrive in waves. Carrier groups rotate endlessly. Fresh planes, fresh pilots, fresh ships. Japanese defenders notice something chilling. Even when they hit an American ship, even when they sink one, another takes its place. No pause, no breathing room. For Japan, every loss is permanent. For America, it's a statistic. Admiral Yamamoto never lives to fully witness the consequences. He is shot down in April 1943. But others do. By 1944, Japanese commanders no longer talk about victory. They talk about delay, holding islands long enough to bleed the enemy, inflicting losses that might, somehow, slow the flood. But the flood doesn't slow. It accelerates. What Japan misjudged was not American courage, or strategy, or even technology. They misjudged scale. An economy that could turn cities into shipyards, car factories into tank lines, refrigerator plants into aircraft factories. A nation that treated war as a manufacturing problem and solved it. And soon, on the horizon, Japanese lookouts will see something that confirms their worst fears. An armada so large it seems unreal. More ships than they believed existed. And at that moment, the war changes forever. Type Continue to generate the next section. Section 2. The Flood. June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea. Dawn.
But with ships, dozens of them. From the bridge of a Japanese cruiser, the sight is staggering. Carrier silhouettes stretch across the sea like a moving city. Flight decks gleam in the early light. Aircraft warm their engines in endless rows. This is not a task force. It is an industrial expression of power. American sailors call it Task Force 58. Japanese officers will remember it as something else entirely, the moment they realized the war could not be won. By mid-1944, the United States Navy has achieved something no nation in history ever had before: carrier dominance at scale. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the U.S. fields 15 aircraft carriers, 8 fleet carriers, and 7 light carriers, supported by battleships, cruisers, destroyers, oilers, repair ships, and floating workshops. Every ship has radar. Every carrier has trained air groups. Every loss can be replaced. Across the water, Japan's once proud carrier arm is hollow. Pilots are rushed through training. Fuel shortages limit flight hours. Veteran airmen, the irreplaceable corps lost at Midway and Guadalcanal, are gone. Yet Japanese commanders still hope for a decisive blow, one great battle, one catastrophic American loss. But they are fighting arithmetic now, and arithmetic does not care about courage. The battle begins with aircraft. Wave after wave of Japanese planes rise into the sky. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, many flown by young pilots with barely 100 hours in the cockpit. They fly straight into a wall of American defenses. Radar-guided fighters intercept them miles from the fleet. F-6 Hellcats descend with speed, armor, and firepower the Zero cannot match. What follows will later be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By nightfall, over 300 Japanese aircraft are destroyed. American losses are minimal. But the most devastating damage happens below decks. American submarines, Albacore and Kavala, slip through Japanese screens and strike carriers Taiho and Shokaku. Both sink. More irreplaceable steel, more irreplaceable crews. After the battle, Japanese staff officers compile reports. The numbers are brutal. Japan has lost 3 aircraft carriers, hundreds of planes, the last meaningful corps of naval aviators. America has lost a few dozen aircraft, 1 light carrier damaged, quickly repaired. The conclusion is unavoidable. Even if Japan sinks American ships, it cannot sink them faster than America builds them. That truth becomes undeniable as the war pushes westward. Saipan, Guam, Tinian. Each invasion arrives with more ships than the last. Japanese observers report seeing carriers they've never encountered before, names they don't recognize, hull numbers too high to track. Behind the scenes, American shipyards are operating like clockwork. At Newport News, Brooklyn Navy Yard, Norfolk, Puget Sound, carriers slide into the water every few months. Crews board them as if stepping onto buses. Some sailors joke that if a ship is sunk on Monday, its replacement is already halfway built. It isn't entirely a joke. Captured Japanese officers are sometimes shown photographs, rows of carriers under construction, assembly lines of aircraft, warehouses stacked with engines, guns, radios. Some refuse to believe it. Others stare in silence. One former Japanese naval officer later writes that seeing American production figures was like discovering the enemy had infinite reserves. Infinite. That word appears again and again in post-war testimonies. October 1944, Leyte Gulf. Japan commits its remaining naval strength in a desperate gamble. Battleships, including Yamato, the largest ever built, steam toward the Philippines. The plan is complex, risky, nearly suicidal, but it is born of necessity. Japan knows this may be the last chance to disrupt American momentum. What they encounter instead is the final confirmation of reality.
American forces appear from every direction. Carrier groups rotate seamlessly. Damaged ships withdraw and are replaced almost immediately. Even when Japanese forces achieve tactical successes, they change nothing. The machine keeps moving. After Leyte Gulf, senior Japanese commanders begin speaking privately, not about victory, but about how long the war can be delayed. They understand now that the decisive factor was never a single battle. It was never Pearl Harbor, never Midway, never even the atomic bomb. It was production. America did not just fight Japan, it outbuilt it. And as the war grinds on toward the home islands, Japanese leaders will face a final, terrible realization. They are no longer fighting an enemy fleet. They are fighting an industrial system that cannot be exhausted. And the next stage of the war will push that system and Japan to their absolute limits. Early 1945, Tokyo, underground conference rooms beneath the Imperial Palace. The city above is dark. Air raid sirens have become routine. Factories burn at night. Rail lines are shattered by day. Inside, Japan's remaining naval and military leaders gather around tables lit by bare bulbs. The maps no longer show arrows of advance. They show circles, shrinking ones. American carrier task forces now operate off the Japanese home islands. That alone would have been unthinkable in 1941. But what truly unsettles the men in the room is not proximity, it is permanence. Reports arrive daily. American ships do not withdraw after strikes. They remain on station for weeks. They refuel at sea. They repair damage without returning to port. Japanese planners had assumed fleets behaved as they always had, that ships needed long pauses, that pressure created windows. There are no windows now. The American Navy has become continuous. One intelligence briefing lays out the reality in stark terms. The United States is now commissioning one new aircraft carrier nearly every month, multiple destroyers every week, thousands of aircraft every quarter. Even worse, many of these carriers are no longer new in the fragile sense. They are veterans. Ships like USS Enterprise, USS Essex, USS Lexington, USS Intrepid, all damaged, repaired, and returned to combat faster than Japan can plan against them. For Japan, damage equals loss. For America, damage is an inconvenience. Japanese officers begin to understand the cruel mathematics. If they sink an American carrier, they eliminate one deck. If America launches another, it adds dozens of aircraft, trained crews, radar systems, and logistical support. The replacement is often more capable than what was lost, and the replacements keep coming. March 1945. Operation Starvation. American aircraft mine Japanese harbors and shipping lanes. The goal is not dramatic destruction, it is suffocation. Fuel stops arriving, food shipments slow, steel piles up unused because it cannot move. Japan's shipyards sit quiet, not for lack of skill, but for lack of material. August 1945. Tokyo Bay. Early morning. A thin mist hangs over the water. American warships sit at anchor,
rows of gray hulls stretching to the horizon. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support ships of every kind. It is the largest naval assembly the world has ever seen. Japanese officers aboard small boats approach slowly. Many have spent their lives at sea. They have studied fleets, tactics, tonnage. Nothing in their training prepared them for this. The sheer number of ships is overwhelming. This is not a fleet gathered for battle. It is a statement. On September 2, 1945, aboard USS Missouri, Japanese representatives signed the instrument of surrender. The war is over. But as they stand on the deck, surrounded by American officers, the reality is impossible to ignore. Behind Missouri lie hundreds of ships. Behind those ships lie thousands more. And behind them, factories, shipyards, railroads, and cities untouched by war. For Japan's naval leadership, this is the final confirmation of what they had slowly come to understand. Meanwhile, American production numbers grow, even as the war nears its end. The system does not slow down, it accelerates. There is a moment, recorded in post-war testimony, when a senior Japanese naval officer studies American shipbuilding data and simply stops speaking. The figures do not look like wartime production, they look like peacetime excess. Factories operating beyond necessity. Ships built not because they are needed now, but because they might be needed later. It is a concept Japan never planned for. The realization spreads quietly through the leadership. They had gambled everything on speed and shock, on knocking America down before it could stand up. But America did not stand, it rose, with a depth and scale Japan could not match. April 1945, Okinawa, the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific, begins. More than 1,300 American ships participate. From the shore, Japanese defenders watch the horizon disappear behind steel. Carrier aircraft arrive in waves that feel endless. Some Japanese pilots climb into their cockpits knowing they will not return. Kamikaze attacks strike ships, sometimes successfully. But even when they hit, the effect is fleeting. A damaged destroyer withdraws, another takes its place. In underground rooms in Tokyo, planners now speak openly. Even a perfect defense cannot win. Even extraordinary sacrifice cannot close the gap. They are no longer fighting an enemy bound by limits. They are fighting an enemy defined by capacity, and capacity has no surrender point. The final months of the war will bring firebombing, atomic weapons, and surrender. But long before that, long before Hiroshima or Nagasaki, the war was already decided. Not by a single battle, not by a single bomb, but by a truth Japanese commanders never imagined, that America could lose ships and planes and men and replace them faster than any enemy could destroy them. The aftermath.